person wherever you are. So I just think that the better this title for anyone who has said enough and who is looking for something better, I think they're going to really gravitate to this work. And I think the stories in the beginning parts and in the introduction and in the first chapter really do set the groundwork for showing that transformation. That's what I get from your book, Waking Up to Who He Could Be. It's that gentle invitation into a brave space. That's a term from Mickey Scott Bay Jones,
Yes.
who I love. She's got Invitation to Brave Space is her work
Hmm.
that she's done, and but really that better waking up to who we could be really does provide a lot of hope, and it doesn't. One thing that I really appreciate too, that you're very gracious with your writing, is you don't come down too hard on folks. You take the life experience that you've seen, and you just I should have pulled some more quotes out from your book, but even just some of the things that you say in there they're just gentle. They're gentle. So
Well,
I'm excited about part two, because it seems like part two is going to be a little bit more get off your butts, people,
yeah,
because
yeah.
do
Well, it might
justice.
be. It might be. So,
Yeah.
so I. It's funny, right? Like, so I don't make a particular effort to be incredibly gentle, as much as as a language arts instructor, the what I used to teach young people is that it does you no good just to say what you want to say
Yep.
and not have it received.
Hmm.
So I try to think of what's the thing that may be new and different and challenging that needs to be said, and how then can I say it in a way that makes it as accessible as possible.
Yeah.
It's not going to be accessible by everybody, but how do I make it as accessible as possible, as likely as possible that the person will hear me, because I'm usually trying to speak in nuance, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh you asked about that very first story I tell in the book, and I tell the story of a former student of mine who one day on Facebook he just up and says, listen here, I this marriage equality has just passed, and that for me feels like an attack on the fundamental teachings of the church. In for him, he would say the fundamental teachings of Jesus. And I have to love Jesus more than I love even the queer folk in my life.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm going to say what I believe. And if that offends you, so be it. Marriage is given by God. This is an attack on marriage that the devil is orchestrating. And if that doesn't, I screw up all the time. It's important for me to include this because this was what
Yeah.
his attempt to be gracious, right? I screw up all the time. So it doesn't matter to me that I'm not trying to make what I see as to being your sin greater than my sin. But if it's a problem for me to call it sin, then so be it. Right. Like, and
Yeah.
so he just kind of left it at that. And I got into this conversation. So that started a conversation on his Facebook page. And I tried to just listen.
Hmm.
But it became this kind of diatribe and just, kind of about queer folk and this kind of anti-affirmation.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
the people who started to have the most currency in the conversation were the people who would be who could be as the most anti
Right.
and the most abruptly so.
Right.
And so finally I jumped in. Somebody said something about the Jesus story.
Mm.
And so finally I jumped in and I said, I don't know if you all have paid attention, but the Jesus story is quite more often than not about his embrace of those who were alienated and ostracized and put out and put upon and called sinner.
Yeah.
by the establishment. And man, they came for me like nobody's business.
Right. Yeah. Because who wants to be called, but it's pointing out like we don't get to choose the last. You know what I mean? We don't get to choose it. But yeah.
I mean, but that's the story. I'm like, you can come down when you want to, but this is the story. This is the story. And someone told me, someone finally had ended with this statement about that reminded me of that line from the well, it wasn't the Untouchables, but it was a movie with Kaiser Sose where Dude says the greatest deception the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he did not exist. And someone kind of dropped that line on me like I was an agent of the devil trying to convince the world that the devil didn't exist. And so then that had me thinking, what have we done to our young people?
Yeah.
Where we pass the story of faith along to them in such a way that faith is not about the imagination and the commitment to do, but faith is about deciding who's in and who's out, drawing the circles, determining who's in God's favor and who's not in God's favor, right? Not as Jesus said, grace you have received, now grace give. But rather this business of, people need to know they're wrong.
Yeah.
And if that means I got to consign them to hell, then I'm going to consign them to hell. And in the same breath, that I consign them to hell and tell them that they're in the devil's service, I'm going to say, but I don't have a heaven to put you in or a hell to save you from, right? Right. I'm going to try to pretend like I didn't just write you out of existence, right? And so that's the whole premise of Better Than was, is that the real telling of the story? Yeah. Or is that how we tell it?
Right.
What if the world with all its hostility is the world that people of faith have storied into existence with hostile faith stories we tell?
Right.
And if that's the case, then what if we told more beautiful, more just, more great, just virtue-filled stories? What if we told better stories, and how would that help us show up in the world better? And then, and so then that's what I do. I kind of make an argument, and I give a little bit of a methodology for how to tell better stories, how to understand when your stories are being told by the most strident voices, but that the way those stories, those faith stories, whether they be your religious faith stories or your communal faith stories or your national faith stories, are those faith stories the actual stories being told? Or are they being told in a particular way? And so how do you go back and reclaim them as your own and recognize your agency in this moment to tell a more beautiful story? Because I think what we're doing, honestly, the reason these kids have to do what they're doing is because we've lost the storytelling battle.
Yeah, we're just telling the same story and just trying to push it harder. Trying to push it harder.
We're just trying to push it harder. But what's happening is, for whatever reasons, the story that somebody else is telling is more compelling.
Right.
Right. And so then how do we get in the game with being able to tell a story that is so beautiful it can't be denied?
Yeah. Well, I think the story that the kids are telling are one that actually has an ending where there's change involved, to where the story that has kind of been circling just sort of talks about change in a kind of hyperbole. You know what I mean? It's kind of just like is something that is out there that might be happening, but
this kind of hypothetical.
Yeah, it kind of helps. Lip service. Even if
we shall overcome one day.
Right.
I haven't, but you and I and us together, we don't have any real responsibility to make one day today.
Right. Yeah. But the truth is we do have that responsibility. And I think what your book invites people to is to step into that responsibility and to read stories that if you've been feeling like enough, then these stories will help put some more context to your enough, and hopefully we'll move even into forward. So I do want to just touch base because I want to wrap up. You've taken us on an absolutely amazing journey, and I really appreciate all that you've shared. But you did tease us a little bit and say that there's something new coming out. So I want to just touch base on this new book, Doing Justice, and when is that going to be out? And what?
Oh, no. I noticed I didn't use the language book. I simply said writing project. What's actually next right now, one of the things that better birthed in me right around the time of the Charlottesville riot, was an articulation of a 12-step process to beloved community. So I call it the beloved community 12-step model. And it grows out of the fact that when I was writing better and doing facilitation and consulting, and I used to say that beloved community, this notion of a place where we can actually do right by each other, is more of a 12-step process than it is like a college semester seminar.
Mm-hmm.
And so a friend of mine, Sharon Groves, whose father just passed away yesterday, and so she's deep in my spirit right now. And she said to me, you should articulate those 12 steps.
Yeah.
And so on the day of the Charlottesville race riot, on the day when young white men with tiki torches were marching to the statue of Robert E. Lee and saying, "You will not replace us, and you will not replace us." On that day, when several of my friends were in a church, the church opposite of that statue, and hunkered down, afraid for the bodily harm that could possibly be done them if they stepped out.
Yeah.
And I say afraid. Most of the folk in that room were probably more courageous than I would be if I were in that situation, and many of them did step out.
Yeah.
On that day, I went into my office where I'm sitting now, and I started trying to flesh out those 12 steps, and it was just a matter of trying to adapt what has been the traditional 12 steps for Alcoholics Anonymous. It's happening. And it wasn't until about noon on Saturday I came up for air and found out this craziness that was going on in the world. Yeah. And so what those 12 steps have done is they've kind of become a way for me of framing the behavioral progress that needs to be made.
Yeah.
Beyond simply trying to think and talk and feel better.
Yeah.
Much of what came out of Charlottesville, the thing that the media chose to grab onto and to repeat over and over is we need to stop hate.
Yeah.
Hate. As if the problem expressed there was about how those folk felt about me. To be honest, I don't really care what they feel about me.
Right.
The problem was what was physically done in those spaces, including the death of a young lady.
Right.
The problem was what was given a pass when our president said, "Oh, there's good people on both sides."
Yeah.
The problem is all of the folk who felt like they had to say something completely meaningless in response so as not to mess with their potential run for office the next time around, because they didn't want those people putting up a candidate to run in opposition to them. Like, that is the problem. And so that's why this notion of trying to find a model that has credibility already within society, and then use it to say, this is how we treat the problem that is systemic inequity, that is supremacist logic. This is how we treat that problem so we can actually get to better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love it because I'm hearing you